Friends, I appreciate you joining me today. Donald Trump's attempt at a divide-and-rule strategy is now dramatically imploding, and the catalyst was a single consequential meeting held in Mexico City. But how does a carefully engineered plan from a dominant world power collapse so completely? And what unfolds when two longtime partners, stretched to their limits, choose to push back side by side? Trump believed he could pit Canada and Mexico against each other during trade talks, yet Canada's leadership executed a diplomatic counterplay that has reshaped the entire political equation. This moment surpasses routine trade disputes or tariffs. It's the story of two nations declining to be coerced and instead forging an alliance with the potential to redefine North American power dynamics. To truly see why this matters, we have to trace how we got here. For months, Trump wielded tariffs as a blunt weapon, attempting to squeeze both Canada and Mexico into submission under heavy economic pressure. His formula was simple: manufacture division to keep control. He tried to make each nation vie for his favor by threatening to cut the other out of North American trade altogether. At first, this approach seemed to work. High-profile Canadian provincial figures such as Doug Ford and Danielle Smith publicly questioned whether Mexico even belonged in the trade deal, hinting Canada might benefit more by going solo. Trump was driving a wedge between the smaller partners, leaving them scrambling for his approval while he set the terms. A quiet meeting on the sidelines of a summit appeared to signal that Canada was easing tensions with Mexico, which had been frayed since the start of Trump's second term when he slapped fentanyl-related tariffs on both. Yet matters worsened after Ontario Premier Doug Ford floated the idea that Canada ditch Mexico as a trade ally and negotiate only with Washington. Predictably, this infuriated Mexican officials and deepened the rift. The tension was thick, the damage mounting, exactly the scenario Trump wanted. His neighbors were fighting each other while he dictated conditions. But that was also the moment his plan began to unravel. Instead of competing for crumbs from Washington's table, Canadian leaders made a calculated move to do the opposite of what Trump expected. They flew to Mexico City not to undermine Mexico, but to craft a united front able to withstand pressure together. Canadian and Mexican leaders appear to have patched up the rupture triggered by Trump's election, when his tariff threats split them apart. His maneuver even pushed some Canadian politicians to call for Mexico's removal from the CUSMA trade pact. Facing a common adversary, the two countries decided their strength lies in unity. As one insider put it, both nations are undergoing massive economic shifts, and their efforts gain power when coordinated. This new cooperation zeroes in on two key aims. First, they're determined to safeguard North American free trade by synchronizing their approach ahead of the CUSMA, renamed USMCA, review that replaced NAFTA. The immediate priority is to roll back the punishing tariffs before year's end, creating room for constructive talks on the trade agreement's next phase in 2026. Yet this effort requires subtle handling to avoid igniting tensions with the Trump administration. Diplomats are taking pains to ensure the meeting is not framed as two nations teaming up against the White House. Even so, both Mexico and Canada acknowledge that normal trade relations with Washington are no longer a certainty and are pursuing fresh partnerships. This environment opens a chance to strengthen their bilateral ties after decades of minimal interaction. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum voiced interest in boosting maritime commerce with Canada, tapping into Mexico's ongoing economic resurgence. Signaling this shift, Prime Minister Trudeau had already begun repairing the relationship, extending an invitation to President Sheinbaum for the G7 summit, a gesture of collaboration rather than rivalry. The timing proved ideal. Just as the U.S. formally began its review of the trade deal, Canadian envoys were meeting with President Sheinbaum to finalize the Canada-Mexico Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. This is far more than a photo op. Both nations are confronting Trump's fentanyl tariffs as well as additional duties on autos, steel, aluminum, and for Canada, softwood lumber. These shared challenges are creating a common incentive to cooperate, laying the groundwork for unprecedented coordination. What they are designing is not a standard trade agreement but one centered on security cooperation and cross-border measures, potentially addressing Trump's concerns over fentanyl trafficking while maintaining their own terms. This emerging Canada-Mexico pact spans trade, security, energy, and infrastructure, deliberately structured to operate independently of Washington's volatility. The strategic foresight is remarkable. For months, Trump wielded the threat of excluding Mexico from CUSMA to pressure both nations, hoping to turn them against one another. Instead, Canada and Mexico have built a durable bilateral framework able to withstand the trilateral pact's uncertain future. The scope is vast: integrated supply chains, new energy corridors, intelligence sharing to curb drug trafficking, and investment projects worth billions. This is not simply about commerce. It is about establishing a parallel North American partnership insulated from Trump's unpredictability. The timing and optics further disrupt Trump's leverage. While he has tried to force Mexico into paying for stricter border security and fentanyl interdiction, Canada announced nearly $10 billion in funding for UN-backed initiatives supporting migrant integration in Mexico and combating narcotics trafficking. In essence, Canada is carrying out the very policies Trump demanded, only as a cooperative ally rather than under pressure. The economic stakes are enormous. Mexico already ranks as Canada's third-largest trading partner, with bilateral trade hitting $56 billion last year. Until now, the relationship has been mostly transactional, shaped by each country's US-centric focus. Today they are negotiating a major expansion in energy, infrastructure, critical minerals, and agriculture. Across nearly every sector, Canada and Mexico are now working to systematically shrink their reliance on the US marketplace. This is where Trump's misstep stands out. He gambled that by exerting simultaneous pressure, he could drive the two countries into competition. Instead, his approach delivered the ideal incentive for them to cooperate. When confronted with the same aggressor, the rational move is not to turn on one another but to form an alliance. The security dimension underscores this reversal of expectations. Trump had repeatedly insisted both countries were failing to stem drug flows and migration. Yet they're now launching a coordinated security framework to tackle these very problems, demonstrating they can handle the issues jointly if Washington will not. This calculated approach becomes even clearer when viewed through the lens of the upcoming KSMA renegotiation. Trump was counting on dividing the two, threatening to shut one out while offering the other exclusive benefits. Now, however, he faces a unified bloc. When negotiators from Canada and Mexico enter those talks, they won't be adversaries scrambling for Trump's favor. They'll arrive as allies, comparing notes, aligning priorities, and signaling that they're willing to walk away together if demands go too far. This flips the power equation. The leverage Trump once enjoyed as the dominant player in a three-way deal shrinks dramatically once the other two build a solid bilateral foundation of their own. Energy cooperation is an especially powerful pillar of this plan. Mexico has long sought to broaden its energy partnerships, while Canada's abundant resources are hungry for new destinations. By constructing energy corridors and mutual agreements, the two are laying the groundwork for reducing dependence on U.S. energy markets and transit channels, the very diversification Trump's trade wars were designed to block. This pact also neatly blunts one of Trump's favorite pressure points, China. Both Ottawa and Mexico City have been pushed to align their China policies with Washington. Rather than competing to prove their toughness, they're synchronizing their strategies, defusing another of Trump's potential levers. Infrastructure planning adds yet another layer. The two nations are collaborating on port-to-port trade, new railway connections, and integrated supply chains. This isn't merely about today's commerce. It's about constructing the physical backbone for a North American system that need not flow through the United States. Direct shipping between Canadian and Mexican ports means less reliance on American transport networks and less exposure to U.S. trade restrictions. Trump's reaction speaks volumes. He has tried to minimize the alliance's importance, but in reality it marks a profound shift in regional politics. For decades, Canada and Mexico calibrated their economic and diplomatic moves primarily around Washington. Now they're shaping a partnership that can function independently, sending a pointed signal as the Kuzma Review looms. U.S. cooperation is no longer automatic. Finally, the migration and security aspects cut straight into Trump's talking points. After months of accusing both countries of failing to address these challenges, they're now designing joint initiatives to manage them, outside U.S. direction. This development significantly undercuts Trump's claim that only his influence can deliver solutions. The deeper and more enduring impact lies in what it signals about the future of North American integration. For decades, that integration has been virtually synonymous with U.S. leadership, with Canada and Mexico cast as secondary players orbiting Washington's economic center. This new partnership hints at a different paradigm, one in which the smaller partners cooperate to form a counterweight to American dominance. The agricultural component is especially strategic. Canada's vast grain capacity can meet Mexico's heavy import demands. By weaving integrated food supply chains, they reduce Mexico's dependency on U.S. agricultural exports while opening fresh markets for Canadian producers. This approach shields both nations from future trade friction. The alliance's power is in its scope. joint action on climate policy, environmental safeguards, and wildlife protection fosters common interests that extend beyond commerce and make their ties sturdier against political turbulence. The emphasis on critical minerals is equally forward-thinking. Both countries control major reserves vital to the clean energy transition. By coordinating mining and processing, they position themselves to rely less on U.S. supply chains for next-generation technologies. Trump misjudged how economic threats would work, expecting submission rather than innovation. By pressuring Canada and Mexico, he unintentionally gave them the incentive to unite, identify shared priorities, and chart alternative paths. The technology sharing and innovation pieces of this pact are particularly important for its future, laying groundwork for economic self-reliance that could someday rival U.S. tech leadership. Its structure is deliberately flexible. If CUSMA remains intact, this bilateral framework strengthens it. If CUSMA collapses, the framework becomes a fallback platform for cooperation. This is calculated hedging born from Trump's unpredictable trade policy. His tactic backfired. Instead of reinforcing dependency, it spurred both countries to act independently and jointly shape their own path. This shift is more than a one-off maneuver against a single administration. It signals the rise of a new phase in North American geopolitics, one that will outlast today's political winds. The emergence of a solid Canada Mexico axis recasts the continent from a hub-and-spoke model centered on Washington into a truly trilateral system with a more balanced distribution of power. For the first time, meaningful continental dialogue can proceed without originating in, or filtering through, the U.S. This pragmatic realignment, forged under pressure, is setting the stage for Ottawa and Mexico City to move from passive recipients of U.S. policies to proactive designers of a joint agenda. Its consequences are sweeping. This alliance offers a blueprint for middle powers worldwide seeking stability and autonomy in a polarized global order. It shows how countries can strengthen resilience and independence when confronted by superpower pressure, whether from U.S. economic coercion or Chinese strategic reach. By knitting together their economies and security priorities, Canada and Mexico have forged a regional bloc with a combined output exceeding $3 trillion, giving them collective influence neither could wield independently. This approach to cross-border cooperation, driven by shared interests rather than allegiance to a single dominant actor, offers a potential template for similar partnerships elsewhere, reinforcing the shift toward a more multipolar global order. Yet the road ahead for this emerging coalition is far from simple. Its long-term stability will be tested by both inward and outward pressures. On the domestic front, shifts in leadership in either Ottawa or Mexico City could produce policy changes that strain the framework of collaboration. The central issue is whether the strategic rationale for integration can withstand partisan divides and electoral cycles. Beyond their borders, the greatest challenge will likely be Washington's reaction over time. A future U.S. administration might set aside the confrontational posture of the Trump era in favor of a softer diplomatic outreach designed to pull Canada and Mexico back into a traditional U.S.-centered arrangement. Such a pivot would reveal whether the partnership is simply a defensive response to external pressure, or a self-sustaining project anchored in a shared vision. The alliance must show that its core elements, interlinked supply chains, joint energy networks, and coordinated security efforts, are worth preserving even when outside threats fade. At the same time, aligning regulations, security standards, and long-term infrastructure planning across two distinct legal and political systems will demand steady political will and substantial bureaucratic coordination. Lasting success hinges on both countries cultivating robust institutions capable of absorbing inevitable tensions and disagreements between close allies. Even with these challenges, the reality is that the United States can no longer treat North American affairs as a set of bilateral relationships it alone can manage. Washington now faces a coordinated partner with its own internal consensus and, critically, its own strategic options. The missteps that spurred this union have effectively accelerated North America's evolution into a more balanced and intricate political arena. The continent's trajectory will no longer be dictated by one preeminent power but instead shaped by the complex interplay of three linked nations, each steering a course that is, for the first time, distinctly its own.